So like we get there, we run this call, and there's this 2-year-old girl just staring at me, and I'm like, I still remember her face, I remember her eyes, you know, and like I'm pumping on her chest, it's like, you've got to live. And she didn't. So then we come a couple months, my best friend, he calls me, he's like, hey, just a heads up, you have a CPR at your station. They shut the streets off because they're already about to land a helicopter. I'm still in my civilian clothes, and there's like this little girl. I'm looking at this little girl, and it's like, at that time, I'm still thinking clinically, like, we're not saving her. There's damage beyond repair on this little girl. The friend that's off duty, he said the little girl's nickname, and then it dawned on me, this was his girl.
So one thing is the difference between burnout and vicarious trauma, right? So burnout is like, hey, I went on vacation, came back, I feel like I'm ready to go, it's good, right? Vicarious trauma is, I've done all the things I know to do, and it's just not working, and I can't stop thinking about these things that really I need to put to bed. So back in late 60s, early 70s, psychiatry and Christianity did not mix. They were two different schools of thought and didn't really get along very well. A lot of churches, Christian communities were believing that depression and anxiety were simply faith issues. And Dr. Minirth and Dr. Meyer both felt like they had a calling to help the Christians, believers, understand the brain's just like any other organ in the body. And when it's not working, things don't work.
You're listening to the ATO Bridging the Divide podcast, brought to you by the Assist the Officer Foundation.
Since 1999, the ATO has given assistance to the first responder community, and now we want to give them a platform to hear their incredible stories.
We also want to hear the stories of the many people that support us.
Our community is small, but it is strong.
We have differences. We don't always agree, and we all make mistakes.
But together we can grow, we can heal.
And we can learn from those mistakes.
And together we can bridge the divide.
Welcome back, ATO Bridging the Divide listeners. Our community expends so much conscious energy on strength and performance. It's necessary. We spend a career perfecting our craft until it becomes subconscious muscle memory. Today, we hone our focus on psychological health with a fight well mindset brought to you by our guests. We ask you to shift your view of mental health from inadequacy to a guide to transform. Complement this tremendous, courageous physical effort I mentioned. Our interest as a podcast is to provide our loyal listeners the professional tutelage to drive you to protect your brain health, just like your physical health. This secures a powerful anchor. Thank you, Dr. T, that's your word. The conscious energy you invest in securing this anchor allows you to attain your imminent potential. We as a community become more durable, proficient, surgical in our abilities, ultimately making our lives and industry better. We have a unique team sitting at the mics to guide the Fight Well objective. We bring you the Crumps. Barbara, a licensed professional counselor. David, a McKinney firefighter paramedic. They married before they chose their careers. Now our listeners can experience their story of growth. Barbara is an SMU grad and finished her master's in counseling in 2007. She is thoroughly engaged in our culture, being married to a first responder and experiencing a father who was a lieutenant in the Army during the Vietnam era. Her specialties include instruction of trauma curriculum, boundaries, shame, self-care, and EMDR. Recently, she joined 3FTL in 2021, She will give us the details of this mental health treatment team for first responders. David is an advocate for the McKinney Fire Peer Support Program. Please welcome this special team who tirelessly provides support, guidance, and accountability for our tribe. Welcome, guys.
Hi, thank you. Oh my gosh,
Thank
that was
you.
a great intro.
Yeah.
She's the best.
That was really
I can't
good.
wait until I can replay that over and over again.
Yeah.
You were-
Play it on loop.
You might
Yes.
catch a flub in there.
You were very well accomplished.
Oh, I can't.
That was nice.
So excited.
You can make that your ringtone. Just have
Yeah.
that playing on
Right.
loop.
Well, and for the record, David did major in criminal justice.
Yeah. Hey.
I did.
However, he is portraying the ultimate firefighter mustache.
Oh yeah. Everybody will see it in the photos we release.
It's fantastic.
It's a substantial mustache. I like it.
Substantial.
I
We
need
spot each other.
Yeah. That's how we know each other. A little head nod.
Yeah.
Like, I see you there.
Right?
Well, we're gonna have on Misty and I. We recorded an episode with one of the owners of Legends Fit out in Rockwell. I don't know if you've heard of that place, but they are totally supporters of law enforcement and first responders and military. And you see all the stashes and you see all the thin blue line and red blue line. We just and all the tats. Yeah,
yeah, you
you
can.
can spot them a mile away.
Right. That's how you know.
Before I get into this, I want to give a special mention to a guest co-host we have here. It's Lieutenant Lisette Rivera. She's the new lieutenant over the DPD's new wellness unit. Lieutenant, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Joe, for having me.
Welcome.
The first time is always nervous.
Just a little bit.
Usually we'll ask you to maybe sing a little something.
Yeah.
just a little something.
Are you guys gonna get to talk more about that today? Because I want to know more about it.
Well,
Or is that
yeah, we
okay.
can. Yeah, we're actually gonna do something later on about it. It's officially going now, but later on in the episode we'll ask us questions and we'll talk about it.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
I'm going to be asking you a lot of questions.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm ready.
Okay. All right, you ready to dive in this, Barbara?
Sure.
Okay. I'm gonna. There's some little slow speed pitches here.
Okay.
Okay.
Where did you grow up?
Well, I was born in Lubbock, but my parents moved to Long Island, New York, the North Shore, when I was 2. So I grew up between 2 and 18 or 22, depending on what you decide when I actually left, on the North Shore of Long Island, New York. So
When you label it North Shore, what's the difference then as opposed to South Shore?
well, Billy Joel said you either date a rich girl from the North Shore or a cool girl from the South Shore.
Got it.
What would be the medium? The medium.
The
of
medium.
it? Yeah.
Ooh, you don't really want to be in the medium. Like,
When Dallas, that's kind of would it be the Garland area? Maybe?
yeah, that's
East
probably
Texas and
right.
East Texas and Dallas, and it's kind of in the middle.
Now,
Yeah, that's probably a good analogy, right?
You know, he's not wrong though. We have some friends from G Town, and it's a different
It's a different vibe.
It's a
right?
different vibe.
Yeah. Shout out Lieutenant Dan, who's been on. Cleaning up Garland.
There's a couple cops and
up
cops'
Garland.
kids that work with us from
Right,
Garland.
Garland. We need them though.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah.
So, but the North Shore is like, so Long Island's long. That's why it's called Long Island. On the West End is like where you would see like Manhattan, the Bronx, Brooklyn, and then the East is the Hamptons, and then North and South. So, and from North to South, it's only like 45 minutes. So 45 minutes, an hour, whatever. So like, it's a pretty small island to have like all these people.
So technically,
Wow.
there you don't live in the middle. You live in the north or
people
the south.
do. I mean, Deer Park is in the middle.
Okay.
I mean, you don't want to live in the middle, but you do. People do.
Now, David, where did you grow up? Dallas site.
Yeah, a little bit. I kind of grew up all over Texas. I was born down in Baylor, downtown Baylor.
Yeah, all right. Shout out Baylor.
But my dad went to Southwestern Seminary in Fort Worth, and so he became a pastor. So we lived in East Texas, we lived in West Texas, lived in Houston for a while. But the main one was my dad was born in Henrietta, Texas, and my grandfather had a ranch out there and a farm. So that was kind of like the mainstay. Like we would move towns like almost every 5 years because he just went from church to church. And
Okay.
his motto was, "I stay as long as I'm doing good work. When I'm not doing good work, I move on to the next town." So we moved around.
I've tried to have that motto with DPD, and with all my crap work I've been doing all these years. They haven't run me off yet, so I'm stuck
There
here.
you go.
Yeah.
You're embedded.
So you're still doing good work.
Yeah, well, I don't know. It's debatable. All right. Did y'all have first responder families, like any background in first responders?
No, we had nurses in my family, and well, my mom's side, they were all nurses except for my mom.
Okay, they're still first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're
And then,
servants.
and then military, of course.
Yeah.
Like my grandfather was an MP in the Korean War,
Oh wow. Okay.
and then her family, of course. So, and then my other grandfather was a missionary. So it's service has always been in the family.
Barbara, did you your father? He's in Vietnam.
He was during the Vietnam era, but he always was stateside. He was in the Chemical Corps.
Okay.
And so he was, storing, mixing, all kinds of things for
Chemist.
correct.
Wow,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, a chemist. My parents kind of have an interesting story in that, they both went and got their masters in the 70s, which was very unusual for that time. And then for my mom to do it too was pretty unusual.
Yeah.
And my dad was in the ROTC at Virginia Tech, and then after he graduated, he was an officer. And so they have an interesting story in that, they really they were very educated and always had a plan.
That is different for the 70s, though.
It is. Yeah.
It really is. Did he talk about his role in Vietnam much? It was at the tail end of the war.
Ooh, let me tell you something. He didn't, but this is actually an interesting story about growing up on Long Island. Okay, so my parents were from Texas, right?
Okay.
But we moved to Long Island, and my household was kind of different maybe than some of the households around me, right? So we said yes, sir, no, sir. My father was a veteran, I didn't really start grasping what he did during the Vietnam era until about, I won't name the grade because I don't want to call out the teacher, but there was a teacher that I was really proud. I was like, my dad, served in the Army during Vietnam. And he was like, oh, what did he do? I said, well, he's in the Chemical Corps. And he looked at me and he said, oh, so he created napalm and Agent Orange,
Agent
huh?
Orange. Yeah.
And I was like, well, I guess I don't, I was a kid.
Yeah.
And I came home and I kind of asked my mom, I said, they said, he kind of called me out in front of the class and said, that he had created napalm and Agent Orange. And I don't even think I knew what those were. And my mom was pissed. My mom was like, because this person they were of the same age, but they had found a way out of serving, and so my mom was pissed, and she was like, you go back and tell him. And of course I didn't, but that was my first introduction.
I'm surprised I didn't go up there.
I know. You know what, my dad is chill. My dad was like, whatever, teach his own.
Well, he's heard it all.
Probably.
And most people that serve, it's like us. But we hear it. We don't care.
Yeah.
We care, but we expect it, and it comes with the territory. And the same with the military, especially back then in the 70s when it comes to that Vietnam War.
Right. Well, and unfortunately, sometimes I veer away from even telling people he was in the Chemical Corps because there's enough people. We had a really good friend who literally said to me, oh, so your dad killed my dad because his dad died of cancer from Agent Orange. Yeah. So, and look, my dad was doing what everyone did. He was just following orders, and we didn't know. And bless his heart, I still love that friend of ours, but that became something that I became really careful about sharing about the Chemical Corps because that just really strikes a chord with people. Yeah.
Well, so my adopted father, he served in Vietnam, and he actually, I believe he died of Agent Orange as well because my mom tried to get those survivor benefits. Right, and that was right in the late 80s, early 90s when those benefits were just getting going, but that was what was needed at the time. That was just part of what was going on in that war. It was your father just did his job, and that was his role. Right. Just like the other side had their roles, right?
Right.
It was similar. So
yeah, it's tragic.
Yeah, you can't. People are going to talk, but
you just roll with it.
You do.
But I think it really started to. It's when I started to really realize, growing up on Long Island, that my household felt a little different than the households around me. And I'm not saying there aren't people who served there and there aren't people who, but it started to feel like we are just a little bit different. Like my parents took us to Southern Baptist Church. Most of my friends were Catholic or Jewish or very many different faiths, but we were Protestant, and we were sort of the not many of us there.
Right. Where did y'all go to college?
I went to Sam Houston. I started there. Okay. I still haven't finished. I got enough hours in so many different things. I could probably have a degree, but I don't have
same
one.
here, man. Hey,
but I went to Sam Houston.
Seems like you're doing well.
Yeah,
so you're
I feel like I'm doing well.
Yeah,
Figured it out.
I think things have worked out.
Hey, you're on a podcast.
Yeah.
You're not.
For the right reasons.
Yeah,
Right?
Yeah. We're not
There's other
mentioning
podcasts about murder conspiracies that I never want to be on.
Or a serial killer.
Yeah.
We're talking about the serial killer.
Yo,
David
I remember
Crump.
in high school, I asked like my government teachers, like, I think I want to, like the goal was like, I want to be in the FBI. Like, what do I need to do? She's like, you need a criminal justice degree. Start there. Then you probably need a law degree. And I'm like, all right, I can start. It's like, where should I go? So I went to Sam Houston, and I got into the criminal justice, but I really got into not doing school there too. So that kind of got in the way.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, hey, I'm in the same boat, but I think we're okay, David.
Yes.
I'm. Yeah. What about you?
Well, I was a wild child on Long Island. And my parents, I think looking back, were like, hey, maybe it would be a good idea to get her out of this area. And so they were willing to let me go see SMU.
Oh, okay.
So, because I knew, there's a kind of a long story. I thought I would go to a big school, but I knew I'd get lost, and I didn't want to go to a small school in like a Pennsylvania rural area because I knew I'd be bored. And so SMU sort of had the perfect combination of like a small private school in a city, and it was conservative enough in my parents' eyes that they felt like it's worth it.
What year was that?
Oh, I started in 97 and graduated in 2001.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, SMU's very renowned. I mean, it's in. Had you ever been to Dallas before this? Really?
No.
You just came to Dallas just for college?
Just for college.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah. Just for college.
What'd you think of it coming from New York into this?
That's a good question. What did I
Fair
think
bird.
of it? Right? Well, I mean, I guess, SMU is a bubble. So that was different than Dallas proper, I guess. What did I think of SMU? SMU was fun, different, conservative. And it's so funny now because I work at like the Meyer Clinic, which is a very conservative clinic. And sometimes like Dr. Coburn will ask me like, oh, you're from a liberal school, SMU. And I'm like, oh, well, trust me, when I was going there, it felt super conservative to me. So it felt kind of conservative, but like it was fun and there was plenty to do. And it was a good school.
Did you live close by? Did you live on campus there?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so you just kind of, when you went out, was just around that little bubble of the...
We went to like Deep Ellum.
So she said like her wild times were just in Long Island. But you still had fun here.
They
Bellum?
extended 4 or 5 more years.
Dallas has a lot to offer.
Yes.
It does. Yeah. I stayed in plenty of trouble for a while. I was very, very lucky, honestly, like looking back.
Especially Deep L. I wouldn't go down there without a... my pistol's always on me. But.
Right? Yeah. No, I was always a risk taker. I was always looking for adventure, always, my whole life. And so that put me into situations like that where I was like, all right, let's have some fun.
Yeah, you might as well.
Yeah.
That's part of keeping up your mental health, right? The studying, and then you got
Right. Right, exactly.
So what did you do right after you graduated?
Right after I graduated, I went into like media sales, so advertising media sales. So I did assisting, and then I went into Dr. Pepper corporate, which is now I think like Keurig Dr. Pepper. I don't know. We had 4 different owners while I was there because I was there for 12 years. So out of college, I went and did advertising and media market negotiations for 12 years, which I can't believe because that feels like a different world.
Did you ever watch Mad Men? That
Yes,
show?
Oh, yeah.
we
Oh my
loved
God,
it.
that's one of my
Yeah.
favorite. No, the Draper.
Yes.
So you were like the Peggy. You were Peggy basically.
Oh,
on that,
I was a
huh?
Peggy. Yeah, I was a Peggy.
Or you a Joan?
Oh,
Look at
That's a good question. Like that I had to pause for a second.
great question. Maybe a combo? Maybe a Peggy who wanted to be Joan? I
Yeah.
don't know.
I would
That's one of
almost
my
say
favorite
like I would
shows.
almost say
Yeah.
like you were Joan that also operated as a Peggy. because you ran your
Creativity.
business. You did your
Yeah.
and you were good at it.
I was.
You were
and then,
good at it.
And then I discovered marketing is not for me. I
Yeah.
could not sit in another meeting talking about like, oh, is the can here? Is the can here? Like, is,
Yeah.
we're going to spend 120 million this way or 120 million that way. And it was like, okay, this is for someone else. So in 2007, though, I started my master's. And I thought, okay, my master's in counseling. And I was like, well, this will be like a nice hobby. I'll work full time and go to school at night. And I just creeped through my master's in 2007.
David, I looked at your bio. You work for the Mavs,
I did.
and I'm a Mavs fan for a long.
Yeah.
I mean, I've back in the '80s, I was a Mavs fan. Going to Reunion Arena, and then
Oh yeah.
the terrible '90s with all those spare teams we had, and then
So many.
What did you do there? It's fascinating.
So it was crazy how I got that job. I had a lot of good friends around me, and then I was a maintenance man downtown, like just kind of bouncing around and looking for stuff to do.
How old were you at that time?
Man, 23.
Okay.
That's what he was doing when we met.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so the guy that worked there, he was like their accountant, and he goes, "Hey, come work for the Mavs. There's a job opening in the warehouse, And so, like, I started off, I filled the internet orders, like put stuff in boxes and stuff like that. And then they graduated me to the Mav Gear manager, which means I just took pictures of the stuff and then filled the orders
All right.
and put it on the internet. And then I got to work at the games and help with the marketing and stuff like that.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So both of y'all have some kind of marketing background. That's
Yeah.
interesting.
Isn't that weird?
That is
Yeah.
weird. Yeah. Were you a Mavs fan?
I was.
Okay. Are you now?
I still am.
Okay.
I don't watch as much sports as I used to, which
Yeah.
is weird. I watch a lot of football. That's probably the big one I sit down
football,
for.
But I'm a huge Mavs fan.
Oh, yeah.
I have Luca. I'm pretty happy we got Dirk wrapped it up. Now we got him.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and David worked every home game. So there's at least 42 of those in a regular season.
41.
41. Oh, man, it's been a while.
Yeah.
41 in a regular season.
Because they weren't making playoffs then. So yeah, it was 41.
Yeah. Well, like that's when I started in 05, so we made playoffs.
Oh, okay.
Twice.
Yes.
So I went,
yes.
yeah, and
that
went
was,
to
that was Nash and when Dirk was. Or,
when I started,
Finley?
Nash had just left.
Finley was-
and so
yeah.
Finley and Dirk were still there.
Yeah. Okay.
And then Josh Howard, Jet, Terry, Stackhouse.
Were you there when they went to play the Heat in the?
Oh,
the
yeah.
Oh, gee, that was so
yeah.
disgusting. How they-
We almost we
Well-
had to they flew us to Miami
Yeah.
to watch some of those games, and that was a rough game.
Oh,
Those were
yeah.
rough ones
well,
to
we
watch.
were up 2-0. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's terrible.
Yeah, the story is that, and I remember it. We were in the office, and they brought city officials into the office to plan the parade.
I
This
heard-
little
I
front
heard-
conference room.
I read
That's-
about that.
It was a true story. It's like, what are they doing? It's like, oh, they're planning the parade. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. And Pat Riley used that.
Yeah,
Brought
of
it into the
course.
locker room. Like, hey, they've already got you canceled out. I was like,
Yeah. Well, they had Shaq and Dwayne Wade. I mean,
Oh,
they were
yeah.
just
and there's conspiracies. The NBA wanted to make Dwayne Wade a superstar, so
he
they
wa-
helped him out.
Man,
and
he
so-
couldn't drive the lane without either getting fouled. I mean,
yeah.
you couldn't touch him. Anyway, we'll
Yeah.
get, hey, this
We
isn't
can
a
go a
Dallas
long way
Mavs
into
talk.
this. We can go a
I'll-
long way
I'll
into
stop
this.
venting about my
Yeah.
Mavs frustration. We got them back in 2011, so screw them. Okay, David, why did you decide to leave this profession, become a first responder?
Man, in complete honesty, is like, of course, the background of service was always there and stuff like that. And I can give you a general answer of want to serve and be a part of that and stuff. But really, all honesty, is like I was hitting 30 years old. I had a brand new baby and a wife, and I had spent 10 years bouncing around job to job. And I met a friend that come back to church, met a friend, was like, hey, I work in McKinney. And these firefighters, man, it's a full career. You get benefits, and you're with a group of guys all day long. And I'm like, I think I could get into that. I think that's something I would really like. And we'd already had a friend, remember Nick Vasulo? He tried to get me to test for Dallas a couple years before that. He goes, you would fit right in. I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. This is the time to do it. If I'm going to do it, 30 years old, this is the time to do it. And so I quit my job. We moved in with my parents, sold a car, and I went to Collin College full time. I got my fire certs and got my paramedic certs just all in a row.
Wow.
And that was a struggle because that was around 2010. That's when like the economy kind of crapped out a little bit.
Yeah.
So it's hard to get hired on somewhere, but we did it. It worked out, and so we haven't looked back since.
Different mentality going from Mavs and marketing into firefighting. How big of a change was that for you? And then Barbara jump in after just talk about you. Did you see a change in his mindset mentality?
It was, and it wasn't like for me, like, so like it's a lot more structured, but I grew up during summers helping my grandpa like work cattle and harvest wheat. So like there's a lot of like hard work and
physical
work with that. So I kind of was used to that, you know, and at the Mavs and even jobs before that, I surround myself with a group of people. So going into the group environment was still like, okay, I get this, but going into the public safety aspect of it, that was like, and just the intensity of like, okay, so every decision could have a very serious consequence. I've never really been in that environment.
Yeah. You didn't walk into the Mavs
right
warehouse and there was a fire there. You always walk into a fire.
If I send someone the wrong shirt, I'm just going to give them their money back and give them the shirt they want.
You're not trying to save somebody's life in a car wreck. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Barbara, was there any apprehension on your part whenever he came to you and said, I want to be a firefighter?
No. He had played around a little bit with, or we had been discussing. I mean, at that point, we had been married 7 years, I think, right? And he had discussed a little bit about like the Marines and like, and there wasn't any apprehension on my part. But picture this. I mean, I just had our son, right? I'm like holding our son, and he's like not even 9 months old, and my husband's like, I think I want to be a firefighter. It's like, okay, you know, and we're both 30. And so it was like, well, if you're going to do it, babe, let's do it. Like, let's not like play around with this and like kind of test here and kind of like, that's when it was like, okay, quit your job. We're moving in with your parents. We're selling a car. We're moving out of this home, our new home that we just bought. And we're doing full-time fire academy. Cause if you're going to do it, like, let's make it happen.
And I tested, this is a couple years before even that, even before the Mavs job, I tested for North Richland Hills, PD, and Frisco. And at that point between those two, I was like, I don't think I would work out as a cop. I just don't think that's the way I'm wired. It's just a little bit different. And so when the firefighter came along and like Nick's talking to me almost constantly, like, you're exactly what, like firefighters, that's what we kind of look for. Your mentality, your personality, you would fit in. I'm like, okay, I can do this.
And Barbara, you were not a counselor at this time, right?
Right. I was still in marketing. I didn't switch till 2015. So the timeline is like, what was that?
Okay, I said, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, I crawled along because I was working more than full time. I had a baby. He was in the fire academy. So I was like taking like one class a semester, maybe a mini master here and there. And then
she was a true hoss. Like I quit everything just to go to school. Like she's still doing everything.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
and then once he was done and he was with McKinney, that's when I was like, I'm going to quit. Okay, now I'm quitting my job and I'm just going to knock this counselor thing out and I'm going to take the licensing exams and then I was like full force.
So did he come back and when you were going to some of these incidents, and would you come back and tell her what you saw that day?
No.
Okay. So you're already right from the get-go kind of shielding the spouse from.
Oh yeah.
So,
but tell our listeners why. When you say no, that is very definite.
Yeah.
No.
It's you start it and then you talk to the older guys that are already there, so you learn from them, right? Okay. So even 10 years ago, that culture is still kind of in place of like, work stays at work, home stays at home, and I think we all can attest that that's a myth. But that was what you kind of learn just talking to those guys. Like if you wanted to get something off your chest, you just told stories at the dinner table, and it was always in story form. You didn't really talk about how you were dealing with it. And I think, and Barbara can attest to this, I've always kind of naturally internalized things anyway. I was not a big sharer to begin with. So things happen at work, I just didn't talk about it. I mean, even to this day, especially calls I'll talk about, but even stuff that goes on at the station, I don't talk about.
Well, you
much.
can't, right?
Shenanigans.
Yeah,
Shenanigans.
you really
yeah.
shouldn't, right?
Yeah.
I know. I tried to pry it out of some of the firemen, and
Oh,
we
David
wouldn't give
Lindsay.
it up.
He went, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Give it up.
No.
Right? Right?
The bunkhouse.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, yeah.
The bunkhouse shenanigans.
Right?
So, Barbara, knowing what you know now, whenever he started, did you notice a change in his mentality and as far as anything from a physical or mental standpoint with his behavior? Did you notice something?
Yeah, I
Okay.
did.
Can you explain that?
Yeah. So like he said, he was kind of already like a more quiet, like introverted kind of guy. And, but as he started going through the years, or I would even say probably noticed within the first year, he was even more quiet. And he would come home and it would feel like, okay, I know something's up, but I don't want to bug him. And I don't want to ask him about if he slept because that's just going to piss him off. And I just, want to be really careful. I probably started walking on eggshells pretty early.
But you recognized something was going on, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, totally. But like, I don't want to poke the bear. Like,
Yeah.
I wasn't sure
Yeah.
what to do.
How did you navigate that?
Well, in the beginning, I probably didn't navigate it great. But I want to rewind a little bit to when you said, were you apprehensive at all about him joining? I think if I knew then what I know now, if I knew then what I know now, absolutely. Absolutely.
But why?
Because I think I would sit myself down and be like, look, it's not even the physical danger, Barbara. You need to be prepared that he may pull very, very inward. He may pull away. This is going to be very hard. There's going to be really tough times. This is going to change the whole dynamic of your marriage, him as a dad, him as a friend, him as an external family member.
Yeah.
I mean, David would start doing things like we'd go to, he's really big into, his family's very close. And we would go to family functions and, David would just he used to be like the life of the party there and everyone, telling jokes and he's the golden child. And so, but now he's going to family functions. He's just kind of quiet. He's just kind of sitting, watching TV and this is his family that he loves. And so, noticing those things, but then how did I navigate it? Not very well, probably in the beginning. I think I did two mistakes that were not good. One was I started walking on eggshells and, for lack of a better term, maybe enabling, maybe not, maybe creating too much of not letting him feel the consequences or the effects of pulling away from the family or the effects of us being like, shh, be quiet, he's sleeping, which I do want him to get a nap, but to make the whole house revolve around him and his mood and what's going on, that's not healthy for anybody. And so I made that mistake. And then the other mistake was at times like wanting to force him to talk about things like, what happened?
Oh, yeah.
Tell me what happened. I can tell something's up. What happened with this call? What happened with that call? Oh, and let me tell you a third one. A third one is when I would hear a really terrible news story from anywhere in the country or world. And I'd be like, oh my gosh, David, did you
Yes.
hear about? And I'd start talking about this really terrible story. And I remember one time you turned to me and you were like, Barbara,
Yeah.
you were like, I don't want to talk about this because even though it was a story from like wherever across the nation, he said, Barbara, I can smell it, I can taste it, I can hear it, and I don't want to talk about it. And
Yeah.
I learned like, okay, we can't do that.
Those news stories are real. Like, you can picture you can probably picture the scene in your head. You know everything about that. And so, yeah, I still avoid a lot of those.
What carries the most weight? Because we can't relate. We're not in a firehouse. Is it the medical calls or is it the fire calls?
It's the medical calls.
Yeah.
And for like a lot of reasons. One, for us, most of our liability, like that's just on the surface, most of our liability comes from medical calls. So initially you're like, okay. And it's sad sometimes, but you make the decisions like, am I going to get in trouble for this or not get in trouble for this? So that it starts there. And then those choices
relate
you
to
make.
that.
Yeah. You can. And on the fire side is like, no, that's That's what makes us look good. That's what's fun. You go in there and put the wet stuff on the red stuff, tear down some walls and some ceiling, and you go home. You know, as long as we put a good stop on it and we didn't burn down a whole neighborhood, most everybody's pretty happy with us. It's the medical calls. It's the kids.
Yeah.
It's the abusive calls too. That like the spousal abuse stuff, like those are no fun.
Speaking of of incidents that stick with you, can you talk about any critical incidents that really got you and kind of haunt you?
Oh yeah,
if you can.
Yeah, well, I'll start it. I may start crying, but I'll just a fair warning because it's still there.
You're not going to be the first, or you're not going to be the last when it comes to that. It's
Well, and just pause for 1 second. If you're going to do the call, I think you're going to do from March 2020.
There's going to be 2 in that period.
The only thing I was going to say about that is just
leave out names. Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Was that 21?
2020 March. Oh,
what year was
March
that?
2020, because it was we had just done. Okay, let me just do a little preamble while you. Okay, we had literally just done a mental health conference with 22 Kill. It was 22 Kill at the time, and the Block Foundation, and we had just spoken.
Right.
He had taken the first 12 off. Am I telling the right story?
Yeah, I'll come to that. Let me back up.
Okay.
So there's a call before that that's still, like, they're still there. Like, I still remember. It was a 2-year-old girl. We're in flu season, and we get called. Me and a buddy get called to a CPR at a doctor's office. You know, so we're like, well, that's weird. So we get there, and there's these 2 doctors doing CPR on this little girl, and we're like, okay. So we take over and we do the CPR. And that's not what stuck with me. Like, there was so much anger from just the parents because they've been there the day before. The doctors have said she has the flu. And we know as like doctors and paramedics, like a kid with the flu is something you have to be very careful about. Well, they didn't fill any of her prescriptions. They didn't do anything to help her with medicine wise or anything like that. So that morning they wake up and she's not conscious. So instead of calling us, or they drove by 2 hospitals, they went right to the doctor's office, and they're not prepared for CPR. So like we get there and we run this call, and there's this 2-year-old girl just staring at me, and I'm like, I still remember her face. I remember her eyes, you know, and like I'm pumping on her chest. I was like, you've got to live. And she didn't. So then we come. So that one stuck on me. Like, we even did a diffusing. We went up to Baylor, and they had a counselor there, and I talked to the chaplain there for a minute, and I'm like, okay, we're doing okay. Then we fast forward just a couple months. So that was like January.
Okay.
So then we come a couple months, and we were doing a mental health conference. We'd done like our little presentation a couple times, and then we got to this conference, and we got to do it, and it was really good. So I'm driving in, because I had just had the front half off. So I'm driving in. As I drive in, my best friend, shout out to Mark Serrano, if he ever hears this, he calls me. He's like, hey, just a heads up, you have a CPR at your station. I'm like, okay. All right. So then I hurry up, and like I get there, and like they already shut they shut the streets off because they're already about to land a helicopter. And so like I still remember all of the. They stop me. I see one of the cops like, hey, man, that's my station. He goes, okay, go ahead. So I hop a curb. I get out. I'm still in my civilian clothes, and there's like this little girl like in our bay. And I recognize one of the firefighters. He's off duty, and I'm like, he's got blood. He's covered in blood. I'm like, okay, this is pretty serious. And I'm looking at this little girl, and it's like, at that time, I'm still thinking clinically, like, we're not saving her. There's damage beyond repair on this little girl. So I'm thinking, hey, what are we doing here? Like, why are we still working this little girl? Let's, you know, this is, and then the flight medics come in, they're starting to give her blood. I'm like, what is happening? It's like, but I'm in there, I'm working, and the friend that's off duty, he said the little girl's nickname. And then it dawned on me, this was his girl. You know, so then, like,
this is a teammate.
Yeah, they lived around the corner. Like, he would bring her around the station on Saturdays when we watch the trucks and engines and like talk and stuff like that. So like, oh no. So then it's like, okay, now I know what we're doing and why we're doing it. So then and even then that's hard. And I'm still doing okay. Then they fly the girl and the mom goes in the helicopter with them. And then they ask me, it's like, well, you're not at work yet. Will you drive him downtown Parkland?
The dad.
The dad. My friend, my teammate. I'm like, okay. So we're 90 miles an hour down 75 trying to get downtown. They tell her they tell us they flew her down to Medical City off Forest and 75. So we're flying down there and like I'm peer support. I just did a conference. I'm like, I should know how to talk to this guy. I've got nothing. And you can imagine the state he's in. He's like, what do I do? I was like, I got nothing for you. I haven't felt that helpless in a long time. And that stuck with me. So we get to the hospital. And he runs, we're both covered in blood. He runs into the ER. He's like, this isn't the hospital. They're at Parkland. I'm like, are you kidding me? You know? And then, okay, so we go down to Parkland. And so he goes in. I'm like, hey, stay here. We're in his vehicle. And I'm like, stay here. I'm going to clean up your truck because the truck's full of blood. And that's when it hit me. I'm like, I can't clean this. So that's the one that sticks with me. You know, and that one will come back and get me every once in a while, you know?
Yeah, that's probably going to stick with me too. Thank you for getting that story out there. That's, yeah. Barbara, it's time for you to jump in. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Whenever you found out about this incident, what did you feel whenever you found out about this from David?
Well, yeah, David called me from the hospital. And I mean, I can't stress enough. You have to understand what this was like for us. We're on this high. We're like, we just did this mental health conference. I'm like excited because I've been planning this for like 9 months. And he calls me and he says, I'm at the hospital. I'm like, okay. He's like, I'm cleaning blood out of the truck. I'm like, what? Yeah. What is happening? I mean, it's just immediate, like my head starts spinning. What's going on? How could this be possible? I just saw him like an hour and a half ago, right. And everything was normal, you know? And then as it's all the pieces started coming together and realizing like all the people we knew that were affected by this, it felt, I'll tell you, you know, what I started to do was go into caretaker mode and started trying to take care of all kinds of people, including him. Yeah. And okay, let's get over to the family. All right, let's talk to the other people that were there. Let's make sure the other wives know what's going on. And
yeah,
it was like default, and I think that was sort of protecting me a little bit. About a week later, and then, you know, we sort of play through it. It's not good. It was not a good scene. I reached out to my friends. Then about a week later, one of my friends very kindly said to me, Barbara, like, you have someone in your home to take care of. You have your own heart to take care of. You have your son to take care of. Like, pull it in. Like, stop trying to be everything to everybody right now because you have your own stuff.
Was that good advice?
Oh, I needed it so bad. And from the right person who was loving and knew us very well. And I think this really helped us to solidify how important friends are, and having friends and good friends we trust and love. Because the thing about that call was we had friends in the department who knew what was going on, but they weren't directly affected by the call. So they kind of swooped in. Yeah. They showed up one day and just made us lunch and said, we're just making you lunch, and that's all that's going to happen. And that was very hard for us and me because I'm used to being the one that's hosting and making lunch. And so I had to just sort of let them take care of us.
Did it help?
Oh, it helped so much. It helped so much to have them just show up and say, we're not taking no for an answer. Sit down. We're making you lunch.
And that guy's crew, like, that's when, like, it sucks that's when you really see the brotherhood and stuff like that, when things like that. But that whole crew took over for him. Like what they did is they got rid of his car and got him a new car.
Wow.
You know, they paid for a professional cleaner to come in and like, we're just going to get rid of the car. We'll get him a new one. They took care of all the stuff for him. You know, it's like, I think it's like, it affected me deeply, but it wasn't my kid. Yeah. What is my friend going through? But that crew that took care of him and the things that they've done since then is phenomenal.
That's the brotherhood.
Yeah. That's the brotherhood.
Yeah, and I want to be clear. I mean, this affected us, but this was not the real people who were affected. Obviously, were the family who lost their kid.
Of course.
Yeah.
This is y'all's perspective, though.
Yeah.
I'm watching David tell the story. He's affected.
Yeah.
Yes, it was not his child, but he's greatly affected. And it's just like when Misty's on Martell and you know, she's affected by what happens to her. I mean, in Misty's case, it was a stranger, right? It was an infant. This is a child you knew, and a friend, right?
Yeah.
Corey, yeah, it spider webs out to everybody, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think we have, so we have a son, and at the time he would have been what, 10, 11?
Yeah.
10 or 11.
Maybe 9.
9, 10, 11.
Yeah. 2020, whatever year
Young.
that was.
And I think it obviously affected you because you're your dad. But
Right.
then also we felt like we needed to, when something like that, what we did learn even before, which is another story, is that
At least I knew in the moment, like when I knew, like when I was cleaning that truck, is like, I've got to talk.
Yeah.
I've got to tell her. Like that's probably the only thing that's going to help me right now.
Yeah.
So.
And she was already established. You were established at counseling. You had
Right.
Yes.
Okay, you were in it.
Yep.
Okay.
I was in it.
We're going to back up in a minute and get into that when you got going.
Okay.
But you recognize, shit,
Yes.
I need some help, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But what were you going to say, Love?
I was going to say, we had realized somewhere a few years back, I think, when you'd had the kid shooting.
Oh, yeah.
That when he has a call, when he's going through it, and Coleman, our son, picks up on it.
Oh, yeah, he knows.
So we decide we don't want to be like, oh, everything's roses, everything's great all the time.
Yeah.
But finding appropriate ways to tell Coleman, our son, like what dad may be going through. And even in that instant, I even reached out to my son's teacher and said, listen, like we just had a really rough weekend. If our son's acting just a little different this weekend, I mean, he didn't know the details at all,
No.
but he just knew like something really tragic happened. And, you know, if something comes up at school, this is why.
Yeah.
That's so important, especially since kids, they tend to internalize everything and make it about them.
Mm-hmm.
So for you to be having those conversations,
Oh, yeah.
that's great.
Yeah, I think we just, well, thank you. We think so too.
Yeah.
I think we just knew like he's going to pick up on something. So we might as well just tell him something age appropriate so that he knows what we're going through.
Do you feel like that's the way to do it?
I do.
Like if you're giving advice to other families that have a firefighter or a first responder in there and they're parenting, it like sitting them down and talking to them about it, does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yes, because they're gonna pick up on stuff anyway. And I've noticed working with families that are like, especially law enforcement, love you guys. And you guys have a lot more, like you may be raising kids with a lot more rules or different kinds of rules than the other families around you. So they're picking up on it. They're picking up on like, our family's different. I'm not allowed to walk down to 7-Eleven, you know, like, okay, well, that's because of what dad does. And so finding age appropriate ways to just talk to them and answer questions. Be like, I will answer any question you want.
The biggest, and this goes early, like we're going to like first year or two, like we're talking about the eggshells and stuff like that. And yeah, my patience level, I still talk about it. My patience level went from like here to like down here. Like you thought, like on our jobs, when we ask somebody to do something, I make the joke is like strangers listen to me better than you do. You know, like when I tell a stranger to do something, they will usually immediately do it without a question. And so the patience level went down, but the biggest trick I've learned, especially with Barbara and Cole, is like she told me, is like, hey, you're jumping on him pretty quick, and why? And so now when I catch and I still do it, it's not like I've fixed everything, but now at least I can say, hey, look, I know I just yelled at you. I know I just made a very bad remark about y'all. I apologize. It's not y'all. Like, I haven't slept or look, whatever it is. Like, I've at least tried to say, hey, this is not about you, Cole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that way the kid doesn't just sit and stew on it the rest of the time. Well, or feel they did something wrong, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that's good.
And spouses too, because if I don't tell her what's going on, especially in the fire service, I don't know about cops, especially the fire service, when a spouse sees their spouse pulling away or being quiet, is like, it's not a bad call. They're like, oh, he's got a girlfriend. That's
cheating,
that's a real thing. That's where a lot of the spouses' minds go to.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. I have to tell David sometimes that our son's not your rookie. You can't. You can't just tell him what to do. Yeah.
When you mentioned your patience dropping, is it dealing with the public? Is it the lack of sleep? Is it the diet? What is it?
It really came from just like how disciplined. I think I became disciplined and rigid, like with our work. Like, we come in at 6:30. There's you check your tools, you check your equipment, you check your gear, you go make breakfast. If you have time, you run your calls. When you do your call, you do it in a very efficient way. And so you get used to kind of that structure. And so then when you see someone like meandering or lollygagging and you're like procrastinating, you're like, what the crap are you doing, man? Yeah. It's like, Cole, I told you to take a shower. I am taking a shower. That was 30 minutes ago. The shower's been running for 30 minutes.
Yeah, now it's a cold shower.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, like, I think that's kind of where the patience went down, because when you're on a call or you're at the station, like, everything just needs to be done in an orderly fashion. When your officer asks you to do something, it comes a little bit of that too, and it comes from my grandfather too. And when an officer asks you to do something, you go, yes, sir, and you just go do it. And that's where I think that's where that came from. The public, I really have a whole lot with issues with the public. That hasn't been there's guys that do have issues with that, but that hasn't been one that's got me yet. There's been some BS calls that we joke and talk about, but that's job security.
So you mentioned being very structured and regimented. Barbara, do you find yourself having to kind of offset that? Like, I've been married for a long time, and I'm usually the one who is more rigid, more strict, and my husband is a lot more fun, more easygoing. So we kind of balance each other out. Is that something? Does that sound about what goes on in your relationship?
Yeah, it does. It does. And the more he's kind of pulls towards being strict and regimented and having the right way to do things, right? And I like to give our son options. And I think but I also think that's our personality. That was always our personalities. So that can be a little bit challenging sometimes. And I had to learn how to be really careful not to do the whole wait till your dad gets home. I had to adjust that, because that was not fair to David to, the minute he gets in, he's going to be handling some discipline option. Yeah. Like, I really had to learn, like, I need to deal with that when he's not here, because they need to be excited to see each other.
Yeah. Instead of just getting inundated with disciplinary and stuff.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I would say you're immersed in our culture. Do you feel like that's given you an edge?
I do.
And why?
Because I think I understand a little bit more where things are coming from. So a couple of things that really helped. I did a ride out actually with Dallas Fire, probably 2019, I think it was, down at, is it 18? That's down downtown. Very busy station.
Sure.
Did 12-hour ride out on the ambulance, and that helped me learn a couple things. One was that how busy it is. The other is that one thing that I was not understanding was it's one thing to deal with calls and trauma and medic stuff and fires and all that adrenaline dump and all that kind of stuff. But I was completely underestimating how much living with 5 to 6 to 8 certain kind of personalities for 24 plus hours also affects his mood, what's going on. Yeah. I mean, if there's one person that's like doesn't quite fit in the station, that can like throw everyone's day off, right? And just dealing with that, like, so realizing like, oh, it's not just that, it's the personalities, it's the politics, it's the who didn't cook properly, and that really helped me to understand that it really takes a toll.
Well, he's probably absorbing their positive or negative energy too, right? And he's bringing it home, and and that's affecting your mood. And
we talked about this last. I was in the shower, and she was talking. I was like, I think I'm just down. I was like, I may be depressed, and I was like, am I bringing the whole house down? Is that what's going on?
He's just a big anchor.
Yeah, am I bringing it down right now?
Right?
Yeah.
So that really helped, and then just kind of learning, like listening to the stories and asking questions. I think when I first started counseling, I thought I'm supposed to be the expert and know it all, and just if I don't know what they're talking about, I just nod my head and I'll figure it out later. But I think one of the keys that has super helped me is if I don't understand, I ask. And now I have enough sort of base that I don't think people feel like when they come in, they're explaining everything to me. But yeah, I mean, if someone's SWAT, like I want to understand, like, how is that different than maybe just patrol, or like how is being, on the engine different than the truck, right? Like, please tell me. And now I work with so many different agencies and cities. I love to learn like their ins and outs, and like, oh, so do you guys always have a battalion chief that's at Station 1? Or, I love to learn like all the little details, and people love to share.
That's one reason why we do this podcast, Barbara. I mean, really, that we want to educate. There's some police that they don't understand the SWAT lifestyle, and the SWAT that doesn't understand the narcotic lifestyle. They don't understand the firefighter lifestyle, and that's what this is about too, to educate.
Yeah.
So going back to whenever you got in, become a counselor, you start the Meyer Clinic. How did you get involved in there? Man,
that is such a cool story, because I don't know if you guys are familiar with Dr. Meyer and Dr. Minerath, but they started over 40 years ago as some of the original Christian psychiatrists in the United States. So back in late 60s, early 70s, psychiatry and Christianity did not mix. They were two different schools of thought and didn't really get along very well. And Dr. Minerath and Dr. Meyer were cadaver partners in medical school, and both felt like they had a calling to help the Christians, believers, understand the brain's just like any other organ in the body. And when it's not working, like your things don't work, right? And so, but prior to that, a lot of churches, Christian communities were believing that depression and anxiety were simply faith issues. So Dr. Minerath and Dr. Meyer started some of the original Christian psychiatry. They wrote 2 huge books. One was Happiness is a Choice. The other one is Love is a Choice. And anyway, all that to say, I started in counseling when I was like 18 as a client. And those were some of the original books that I was reading, because that's all pretty much that existed at that time. But so I get to Dallas, right, which is like just my parents trying to push me towards good things. And then I decided to go to counseling. And then I happened to cross paths with Dr. Coburn, who's one of my professors, and he worked there. And I was like, gosh, wouldn't it be amazing if I could work at the Meyer Clinic? I mean, this was like huge to me. So I get to work at the Meyer Clinic, and I get to work with Dr. Meyer, and he's a legend to me, right? And then I trained in their PHP program, so the partial hospitalization program, which is 100% voluntary. It's not.
Real quick, can you explain what that is to the listener? Because I'm not sure, and I'm sure a lot of listeners
I didn't know
don't
what that was when I read that to you.
Yeah.
So explain it to us.
Sure. Okay, so first responders are typically like when you're going on one like an APOW or whatever, right? You're taking the citizen, and maybe they're needing to go inpatient, right? They're not going to stay there very long. They're probably going to stay there 36 hours, 24 hours. They're just stabilizing them to where they're not a harm to themselves or someone else. At that point, ideally, they're going to step down to a partial hospitalization program where it's 100% voluntary. They go home at night probably. So like at the Meyer Clinic, it's, they show up at 8 a.m. They leave at like 4 or 5. They have 3 individual sessions. They have group every day. They have education. They meet with a doctor or nurse every day. It's very intense work, and they stay from like 3 to 8 weeks. So, and then they kind of step down to what we call IOP, which is intensive outpatient, which means they might see the doctor a little bit less, and they kind of step down to get ready to enter back into their lives.
Is there a lot of substance and alcohol abuse involved in that?
There was a lot of trauma.
Okay.
A lot of trauma. The Meyer Clinic doesn't specialize in substance abuse.
Okay.
Now, that doesn't mean that doesn't come along with it, but sometimes, it's not a substance abuse program.
Okay. And ATO has been involved with the Meyer Clinic for quite some time. Were they already involved with the Meyer Clinic before you got there?
They were.
Okay.
They were, but I was not on the first responder path yet, so that didn't mean anything to me when I got,
Okay. Speaking of that path, let's hear it. How'd you get on that path to the first responder? I mean, you're married to one, but
Yeah.
right.
I'm sure that may have nudged you a certain way, right?
It did. It did. I did the PHP program, and while I was there, what I was noticing was there was such a crap ton of trauma, right? And I started focusing on childhood trauma, sexual childhood trauma and abuse, and addicts in recovery. Those were my 2 favorite populations, because once those people start to once you can see the wheels starting to turn, their whole world changes, and it's you see them get free, and it's really amazing. So I started focusing on trauma in that way. And even I worked on their trauma curriculum just to kind of get it to where it needed to be currently. And then, our family was a normal family and had issues. And I was like, oh, this is great. I'm in the field now. I will be able to just automatically fall into a network of providers who are first responder focused. This is going to be easy, right? It was not easy. I was like, how is it that Dallas in 2018, and I'm in the field and I'm struggling to find good, competent first responder providers?
Yeah.
It didn't seem right. And so I was like, okay, you know what we're going to do? We're going to do a little talk.
Yeah.
Where we just tell clinicians what the first responder life.
I remember that.
It was like 1 hour. It was like, here's some super basic stuff, you guys. All right, go out and heal the world, right?
Yeah.
And then we got such feedback from that, oh, we need this so bad, that it just started, one thing led to another. And
so do you believe being culturally competent is important when it comes to dealing with first responders?
I do.
And why?
Well, I mean, we had some guys activate the EAP, and they call and talk to a counselor, licensed, very professional, but then you start telling our stories and the counselor starts crying, or they don't understand just the basics of so we spend a whole session talking about how my shift works.
And that could be just one story of many that occurred that week.
Absolutely.
Yeah, right.
And another guy had a counselor, had to stop. I was like, I can't handle your stuff, and so
Why?
I don't know. Well,
they're humans too. I mean, really,
yes,
they can't.
I don't judge them
kind
for
of
it, but I don't.
No,
Yeah.
But
I'm
it's
trying
just
to make things better.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So people
No,
understand.
Oh, yeah.
I think a lot of police officers reach out and are they get in there and they're like, I'm not doing this. This person doesn't even get what I'm trying to talk about.
right.
we've seen a lot
lot of that.
We hear a lot of that.
And I give them credit. They had a boundary. I'm maybe emotionally, or maybe there's something in their past that kind of reaches out to them. It's I can't handle your case.
Well, they have thresholds too, just like
Yes,
everybody,
absolutely.
and then they, if you're not used to dealing, talking
Right.
to us and hearing about certain incidents, and because when you're telling a story, when I'm telling a story and you're telling a story to me a while ago about what you went through, I am visualizing it. It's
Right.
making me emotional.
Yeah.
And I don't, I'm not seeing it like you're seeing it. I would imagine, right, Barbara? That's what a clinician would be dealing with, right?
Yeah.
And some people just can't. They can't do it.
Yeah.
And that I really believe, in my experiences dealing with counseling, cultural competency is really important.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine what you absorb
Oh.
because you're absorbing it at home and in your profession.
Mm-hmm.
So what are your outlets? How do you deal with it?
Well, I have a few tricks. So I'm gonna give away this trick that I use in the counseling room. Okay, so because I am a very visual person, when I start hearing the details of the story, and my brain wants to start putting the picture together, what I do is I actually picture, this is going to sound weird, I picture like a talking bubble above the person's head. And instead of seeing what they're describing, I'm seeing the words that they're saying above their head.
That's interesting that you said that, because that's exactly how Dr. T, but she just does it on a whiteboard.
Oh,
And,
how
Interesting.
cool.
Yeah.
And it helps with the
Interesting.
the client
Yeah.
to actually see it verbalized in words with those bubbles. And that's something that really helps.
Oh, that's great.
So that's interesting that
That's
you
so
said
good
that.
to hear
Yeah.
that. Okay, so that was one of my tricks of like to not absorb it in the room, right? Another is that I'm now ART, which is Accelerated Resolution Therapy, and EMDR certified. And what the beauty of those two tools is, I don't have to hear it. They're processing it very quickly in their own mind. The less they talk about it, the better. I've had times when I do that where I literally don't even know what they're processing. I know they're processing a stressful event. I might say a couple times, is there anything you'd like to share? They say no. Okay. All right. Well, then let's just, and I tell them what the next step is. So that helps a lot.
Can you explain to the listener what EMDR is? We've had other doctors on to
Yeah,
talk
they
about it
mentioned
too,
it.
but could you give your perspective on it and also the ART?
Yeah.
Yes, break it down, please.
Yeah, sure. So EMDR is eye movement desensitization reprocessing, and ART is very similar. It's an offshoot, and it stands for Accelerated Resolution Therapy. And both of them use a similar tool in that the eyes are going back and forth, which we believe is sort of simulating things like normal things like going for a walk, but it's allowing our brain to work differently while we reprocess something so it's not as traumatic. So I kind of describe it like, so when you have a traumatic event, you come home, right? Oh, let me rewind. Okay. So imagine a traumatic event is like going to the grocery store. You come home, you have all your groceries. What's the first thing you do? You start sorting them and putting them away, right? So when you have a traumatic event, but you don't sleep, or you have another traumatic event right after it, or you just don't have great coping skills or whatever the heck, right? Then you're coming home with all your groceries and you're shoving them in the pantry. Well, imagine you're doing that over and over and over and over and over again, okay? Eventually I'm going to be like, hey, can I have a glass of milk? And you're going to be like, no, I don't even really want to go near the closet, right?
Sure.
You're like, it stinks. It gets overwhelming, right? And you're like, let's just move. So
Let's just burn the house down.
That makes more
just
sense. It's easier.
Start over.
Right?
Go to a restaurant. We don't need to.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but EMDR and ART, what it is we're going to find a really quick way to like maybe go into the closet. We're going to pull some stuff out. We're going to organize it a little bit. We don't erase anything. We're just simply storing it properly. So it's not something you're like continuing to carry with you, and it's not triggering. And what ART really focuses on is the image. So I've heard some of y'all's interviews, and even with David, like the image can be what brings so much of the pain. So if we can replace the image or change the image in some way that it's not as triggering, well, then the brain will do the rest.
Yeah, you're right. The images will get me because whenever I'm hearing a story from all the many guests that we've had on, just a while ago with David's, I'm visualizing. When Misty is talking about the Martell incident, I'm visualizing. And then I get her perspective, and then I turn around and then Chris tells his, right? So you're getting different perspectives, and you're putting together different images, and and it's not good, but it's it's hard not to do that.
Well, it's task oriented too, and I think this culture likes they
Yes.
want to solve the problem. They want to be task oriented,
Yeah.
and it really relates to that, to those types of personalities.
Yeah, absolutely. So the outlets I have is I have some tricks that I do in the counseling room.
Please tell us.
Yeah.
And then the things that we do, friendship, community is huge. We have worked really hard over the past few years to find good, safe people who keep our confidences, people we can be authentic with, people we can share emotions with, people who aren't going to ask us questions that we don't want to answer, like what was your worst call?
tell the most worst joke known to man, and they just look at me like, "That's messed up, David. Don't do that." But in a way, like they get it.
I shouldn't show you my phone. Some of my pics of my phone.
Oh yeah, yeah. The firefighters, like the group messages, like, come on, man. But but they get us. They understand it, and I can make comments or not make comments, and they totally get it.
Yeah. So community is huge. We even have like a first responder life group at church, which is really helpful. It's small but mighty, like it's over the years, we just get more and more comfortable with each other. And of course, our faith is important to us, and trying to make some sense of some of the chaos that is experienced. And then we just have things that we love, like karaoke. One of the doctors when I was working in the PHP program said, do not forget to spend time with healthy people, because it can feel like very overwhelming to always be with people who are in a hard place, which is great. I want to help them, but I also need people who aren't in a hard place. Yeah.
And we both exercise. Mm-hmm. I think that's part of it. Water, but the exercise, the physical activity.
Obviously, I'm sitting here looking at David's guns over here. And
oh, God.
The guns are equally as intimidating as that stash. Yeah. I'm just saying.
Your guys are better than mine, brother.
I know, right? let's give him a schmedium.
I think Joe wanted us to look at his guns.
Yeah.
But it was like an indirect. You just therapized him.
Yeah.
That's my words. Like, don't therapize me.
I'm used to that.
Yeah. You said it like I could tell she has this voice. She has a counselor voice. I was like, don't use your counselor voice on me. Don't do that. Don't therapize me right now. Just let me be angry.
That would be hard.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, it's hard not being a firefighter at home too. So I get it, but I'm like, just don't do it.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned your love of karaoke and that you exercise together. What other things do you do as a couple to keep your relationship strong?
The activity wise, like first like we don't work out together because I don't do Pilates. Maybe Pilates. I should be, because like I'm still I'm very creaky. But activity wise, like you're like a very sports oriented versus like I do. Cole does jujitsu, and then I can't do jujitsu, but I do the
Muay Thai.
That's what I do. Yeah, and that's a lot of fun.
We laugh.
A
lot.
I think it's constantly talking. That's like our activity. Like we constantly are just kind of chatting and like stuff like that. We don't watch a lot of the same shows together. We don't have the same taste in shows. Every once in a while we do.
Real quick, okay. What is your favorite? What is your type of show?
Sci-fi.
Okay. Did you watch the new Obi-Wan?
I haven't yet,
dude.
I've been waiting for it to finish.
But we do like Star Wars. We'll
do watch that.
Obi-Wan's the best thing I've seen.
Is it really?
It's the best Star Wars or Marvel show they've had on there.
Over Mandalorian?
Yes. Trust me. Yes.
Okay. And Cole and I don't play video games together. Like that's something him and I can do together.
That's cool.
That we can, and like you get Cole. That's it. You want to get him talking. You can't.
Yeah.
Start talking about video.
Tell him about jujitsu or video game.
Right.
And he'll go all day. Because he's kind of like me sometimes. Like he'll just be quiet. He's a vault. Mm-hmm. But
so are you waiting for my show?
I'm waiting for the show.
We've already talked about Mad Men. What else?
Okay, well, I've watched The Sopranos all the way through.
My favorite all time.
Times.
Yeah. Yep.
3 times.
3 times.
Yes. One of my favorite scenes in there is when, do you remember when Carmela goes to the psychiatrist and he's like, don't say no one ever told you.
Yeah.
And you're like, yeah. So yeah, The Sopranos, I love.
The Wire. Did you watch The Wire?
Yep, watched The Wire. Yep. And I love
Peaky Blinders.
Peaky Blinders. Yeah.
Huge. A lot of violent shows, Barbara.
I know. There's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
What's going on inside?
All great shows, though.
Yeah.
Oh, I cook.
Yes.
You're not the firehouse cook?
I do at the firehouse.
Okay, so.
Yeah. That's a point. It's going to be a point of contention.
You touched on a nerve.
Yeah.
Excellent. I can kind of feel them out.
Right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, exactly. So he's like 2 years in, and some old guy at the station trying to stir the pot. So David cook at home? And I was like, no, never. And he was like, well, he cooks here. And I was like, he cooks at the fire station?
Yeah.
He's saving lives.
Yes.
He's saving the
I was
teammates'
like,
lives.
what does he cook at the fire station? And he was like, well, this, that, all kinds of ribs, all kinds of things. I'm like, he's literally never cooked any of that at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
And still doesn't.
No, I can heat things up.
You can.
Yeah, I do that. There's a few things. I don't enjoy cooking, but at the firehouse, it's one of those necessities. You like that's
Yeah.
part of the job. So
part of
like,
the life.
I don't when it's my turn to cook or if cooking needs to be done.
So y'all
like,
share the
I'll do
cooking?
it. Yes.
My grandfather was a retired Oklahoma City fireman, and he was the station chef.
So there are crews that are like that. Like we don't have one on. Like there's another crew. Like Jake Lackey is one of the best smokers of meats I've ever met. Like he can do it.
It's an art.
It's so good. And he can make these detailed dinners and stuff like that. It's like our crew has some good cooks, but none of us like are passionate about it or enjoy it.
Right.
So we all just take turns doing it when we can. But I have a few meals in my pocket that I can do.
So what's your go-to workout to prepare for fire service?
Oh man. So the one I do Muay Thai, I don't like to run. And there's no running on the fire ground anyway. You're supposed to walk with purpose. That's the rule. That's the saying. But you have to have cardio. And so I transitioned to, when I started doing Muay Thai, I'm like, this is the best cardio I've had in years. So CrossFit's pretty close because it's
Okay.
weights, intense weights and stuff like that. But as I realized, unless you know the movements precisely, you're going to hurt yourself. And so I can't do CrossFit. I have a hard time getting the bars over my heads now because of my shoulders and my back and stuff like that. So like weight training's key. I think we all like the science of weight training is like cardiovascular disease. It fights cancers. It fights bone density and stuff like that. So like weight training always has to be mixed in, but you have to have your cardio because like the heart disease is what always gets us.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I mean, for the listener out there, I think a lot of people have the perspective that firemen are sitting in their recliner, and having these
yeah.
big meals. When you say cardio is a must, why?
So the fire, especially with all our gear, that puts a lot of like a lot of heat and a lot of stress on the body, which then puts a lot of stress on the heart. So you have to find the exercise that makes your heart as healthy as possible. And yes, the diet of a firefighter, there are some really good guys that like have really good diets. In general, the diet of a firefighter is not good. And I mean, you hear, especially the medic guys, when they're working all day long, they're going to get a meal when they can, or if they can. So maybe that's pulling a sandwich out of the fridge at the hospital or going by fast food real quick. And then there's a lot of gravy and bacon involved in our diet, and steak. So yeah, so anything exercise type that makes the heart healthier, because you get all your gear on, you're in heat, and then your adrenaline's pumping up, so your heart rate's pumping up, your blood pressure's going up. So if your heart's not healthy, you're not going to be able to sustain that for very long. And then when you wear that mask, that pure oxygen's not good too. After a while, it's like it doesn't feel like you're breathing normal air. So then your heart rate gets up with that as well. So yeah, the cardio is like, we do like 3-mile walks with weight vests to kind of help with that. Anything that kind of just gets your heart going a little bit like on a daily basis. To get your heart rate up on a daily basis is kind of key.
Joe always mentions pinpricks. And throughout our career, all these little incidents, these medical calls are these pinpricks. And so I think there's a lack of effort to keep your mind healthy too.
Absolutely.
We put all this effort into this physicality. What do you do to keep your mind healthy?
I've gotten better at it. We just in our contract with the city, we finally got them to agree to once a year they're going to do a mental health ISO. Good. So once a year, we're going to spend about 4 hours. But also we combine it with also physical health too. So like the plan is you're going to bring in a mental health professional, but also talk about that. But also bring in a dietitian, bring in a physical therapist to talk about things like that. And that's supposed to the first one's supposed to happen in August, and I'm really excited to see how that goes.
You mentioned earlier when you started, you learned a lot from the guys that have been there a while.
Yeah.
Right? So this is something new that they're bringing in, that the city's
Yeah.
bringing in, right? So how are y'all taking that? How is most of the culture taking this new effort to keep your mental health well?
So it's kind of interesting. McKinney specifically, a few years ago, we didn't have like peer support. We didn't have that. And then a lot of us, like the three of us that are in charge of mental support charge of the mental support in McKinney now, we got to watch one of our friends. I call it the decompensation of a human being. Like, he had a call. It was a really bad call. And at the same time, he was injured on that call. So he started having nightmares, waking up screaming. And because of the injury and his personality, he got on pain meds, but kept trying to work. And so the injury never got better. So you had this combination of a guy who was dealing with something mentally, and then we brought in a slight substance abuse problem. And we went from a guy that was firefighter and paramedic of the year, that 1 year, in the very same year, he's getting fired. And you look back now, and we're like, we did nothing to take care of him. Like, as a peer support stuff I've seen now is like, I can look back and it's like, there's a red flag, here's a red flag, and we didn't do anything. And that's kind of like, so in McKinney, everybody knows that story. We're small enough, like we only have 200 firefighters. We're small enough that everybody knows that story. So my age and above, we kind of like, okay, I get it. But now you take this younger generation, these 20-year-olds, man, they'll talk about their stuff. They'll put it out there, and that's a good thing. Sometimes I think they talk a little too much, just in general. But that's my own thing. But so, and then also like kind of like that's what got me into it. But that also so when his family life started to suffer, because he wasn't leaning on them in the right way either. Like, so he had nothing to lean on, and that's kind of where like the whole picture of like your brothers can help you, peer support can help you, but your family is key too, and having them have your backs is like, that's the ultimate crutch to lean on. If it's the family life is not healthy, you're gonna crumble. I feel like.
David, do you find it difficult to be married to a counselor?
No.
Okay. No, I was just curious.
That's a good question.
There's a lot of people that would look at it as being analyzed daily, right? And you look at things through a different lens. I was just curious.
We hear that, like, people make those jokes all the time, and like, oh, you're analyzing me right now, and like, I'm like, I know Barbara, so
you knew her before.
Yeah,
that's right. Both of us knew each other. We were married 7 years before. Excuse me. Before I got into the fire service, and then 2 years later, she went into counseling. It's like, we know each other before these professions kind of took over. I would say took over our lives.
Well, and I've stopped telling people I'm a counselor or a therapist, and I just tell them I work at a mental health clinic. And if they keep asking, of course I'll share. But for the most part, that way it just kind of keeps it from. I'm sure you guys have similar experiences, right?
I tell people I work at a carnival.
Yeah,
There's some truth to that, right?
Yeah.
But you're not going to give any secrets from the firehouse.
All right, Barbara, what are some indicators that first responders that could do a self-check? What if they need to just do a diagnostic check of themselves?
Yeah.
Can you talk about those?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So am I getting good sleep? Is my sleep restful? Are some of the things that I used to like enjoy doing and look forward to, am I not enjoying those anymore? Am I pulling away or detaching more and more from the things and people in my life that I do care about? Am I also not finding ways I need to have ways that are completely outside of whatever I'm doing to rest and recharge. So one thing is the difference between burnout and vicarious trauma, right? So burnout is when, like, think about like a battery, right? So if a battery goes down, you just recharge it and everything's good to go again, right? So burnout is like, hey, I went on vacation, came back, I feel like I'm ready to go. It's good, right? Vicarious trauma is I've done all the things I know to do. I am working out. I am trying to go for walks. I'm trying to hang out with people. I'm trying to do the things. I'm trying to take a break, and it's just not working. And I can't stop thinking about these things that really I need to put to bed. So I think those are two good things to think about. So you want to keep you want to keep resting and recharging. We all need to do that. But when you start noticing like, the things that used to work aren't working anymore, or hey, I used to have 2 beers, now I have 17, or hey, it used to take one of these pills to help me, now it's taking a bunch. I think family members and friends are really good barometers as well. So if they're saying like, hey, you're different, dude, like I'm looking at you. You haven't been the same in a year, right? Another really weird good trick is look back on a picture from a couple of years ago. Like,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
you know, sometimes people can see like, oh, like I still had a spark in my eye. And like now when I look in the mirror, I don't see that spark anymore. That's a good time to start thinking about getting some help.
Yeah. Barbara, tell us about the 3FTL and what that stands for.
Yeah. All good questions. So I have to kind of look at my notes a little bit because I'm not a founder of 3FTL. So 3FTL started in 2019 with a Frisco firefighter wife and a Frisco firefighter who were tired of seeing friends, family members, people close in their lives get divorced, attempt suicide. They had one captain who they were really close to who drank himself to death. And they just vowed no more. It's not going to happen anymore. But as many people experience in all of mental health, no matter what field you're in, you know, people are we're getting handed like, here's a piece of paper. Here's some, if you're lucky, you had EAP, right? If you're lucky, your department did. And it was a piece of paper with like 7 clinicians on it, and you'd call 3 of them and they weren't accepting new clients, 2 of them weren't in business anymore, whatever, right? And then you're like, great, like I'm in crisis and I'm trying to navigate this mental health network, right? And I don't know what I'm doing. And so what they came in to do, which is different than any other organization I know of right now, is they came in and did have a case manager who Jennifer Hawley has handpicked and vetted, and I'm helping with that. That's part of what I help with, is finding those clinicians, both med providers and counselors or psychologists that are properly trained and culturally vetted to work with first responders. So what happens is people reach out to Jennifer, case manager, and then she says, okay, what's going on? She listens to their story, and then every first responder gets a psych eval. Every first responder gets a med eval. They get a blood panel to check on things like thyroid, vitamin D, cortisol, because as you guys know with Dr. Glenn, right? She knows, she screens for all those things too. I mean, Dr. Glenn, Tanya Glenn is such a huge legend for us. Yeah. She's a huge legend for me.
We have another episode upcoming. It hasn't aired yet with her and a female first responder that she treated. Both of them, it's a good one.
Be cool.
It's a good one.
Oh, she's amazing, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so they get a blood panel, they get the psych eval, and then by psych eval, what I mean is they're going to just meet with someone who's trained in looking for psychiatric things or psychological things and answer some questions. We're not talking about like filling out bubbles for like 4 hours.
It's not the one you take to get hired.
Right. Right. It's not that.
400, 500 questions.
It's not that. But we just want to get all that done super quickly. And then they're going to get plugged into a peer group, which there's no clinician involved in the peer group. It's literally peers. And they're going to have their first appointment made with a counselor, and they're going to have all of that put together, and then it's just done for them. Now, 3FTL also is checking for things like, do they accept insurance? If they don't accept insurance, will they accept a low rate? If they don't accept a low rate, can 3FTL somehow subsidize that? Because the last thing 3FTL wants to hear is, well, we can't afford it. And we know we can't afford it. Who can afford it, right? So they're stepping in to organize the case, and then they're also stepping in to help out financially.
That's amazing.
So you have counseling, therapy, case management.
Yep. Med management,
peer support.
peer support.
How do these modalities commingle for better resolutions?
Well, if we're all working together as a team, so each person who comes in is signing a release of information. So we're all knowing like, hey, what's going on? This is what I'm seeing. Because like the counselor is going to spend at least an hour a week with these people. They have to go once a week for 8 weeks. That's the commitment that they sign. Now, if they don't show up, there's a release of information, and I hit Jennifer or hit the case manager, and I say, hey, they didn't make it. And maybe they called overtime, and that's fine. But maybe they're kind of going off the rails a little bit, and she kind of talks them back on the rails, right? Because we're here to help them, right? So we all talk together as a team to kind of know what's going on. The med people know their piece, so maybe they're going to tell me, hey, he's starting a new med, or we're working on their sleep. And almost everyone now is getting referred for a sleep study as well, because I don't think I've met a first responder that doesn't have sleep apnea. No. And as we know, sleep is huge to health, right? So we all work together as a team. We're all talking about what's going on while working in our own disciplines. And then that way we can kind of know more of a 360 so that they're heading in the right direction.
Okay, you mentioned the med people. Y'all have staff, psychiatrists on staff that get to prescribe.
Correct.
Okay, that's unique. Can you explain why that? Because as opposed to a primary care physician that doesn't have a specialty in that medication, can you explain that?
Thank you for asking that question. Okay, so
I have a few good ones.
Yeah. So I love doctors and PCPs and general practitioners. It's so needed. And a psychiatrist or a psychiatric nurse is they've studied in what's going on with the brain and the chemicals and hormones in the brain specifically. And so when someone's meeting with them, they know the questions to ask. They are up on the most recent medication and the most recent medication recipe that's going to help. So,
and there's a focal point to psychiatry, right? As opposed to
general practitioner,
like a sore back or
right.
Yeah, okay.
I'll say like, hey, I don't go to my OB-GYN and when I have strep throat. Yeah. And say like, hey, she can look at it and she can be like, oh, here's an antibiotic. Sure.
But it's not an expert analysis of that particular problem, right? Okay.
Because what if it's more than strep throat, right? It's going to just prolong the process of finding the right mix. And not every first responder in the 3FTL program is on a brain medication, but they're at least like getting sort of screened to see if it would be appropriate to experiment or look at some things.
Okay, I want to get into marriages because, the first responder community, the divorce is very, very prevalent. What fight well, manage conflict, don't sweat the small stuff, I think you're big on. Can you explain that approach?
Why don't you take one of those? Fight well.
So fight
don't sweat
well.
The small stuff.
So the small stuff is, there's kind of things we could all probably kind of go back and forth on in a day, but we kind of learned to just kind of let those things go. The biggest, like we talked about a little earlier, is like constantly having conversations. The boundaries, we're very good about like, hey, I didn't sleep last night. Give me 4 hours and then I'll be good to go. Those kind of like very clear expectations. Mm-hmm. And then coming to fighting well is more of, we're not going to beat around the bush. If you're upset, that's specifically what we talk about. We're not going to try our best not to trail into any other kind of things. Like if you're upset about a specific reason, that's what we're going to fight about. And we do. I'm not going to say we don't fight. People. We still fight. We almost fought this morning, because people do things in totally different ways, and sometimes it doesn't make sense to that other person. So that irritated me. Like when you turned left and I would have gone right, that makes no sense to me. Let's talk about that. Mm-hmm. But you talk about it very specifically. And when you say fight well, then when that person is giving their point, you're purposely listening to their point and not trying to think of what your comeback's going to be. And that's hard. Like that's very hard for me.
Yeah.
So like, and when I do it, when we both do that well, you'll be surprised how long the fight doesn't last after that. Because then I'm trying to listen to what she's trying to say.
As
what
opposed
she's
to one-upper. Yeah.
Yeah, instead of
Okay.
just one-upping each other. You know, or not listening is like, well, my counterpoint, I'm just going to stick to what my point of view was. And so that's the fighting. Well, the sweat, the small stuff. That's kind of what we've kind of learned that in the fire services. There are things you can control and things you can't control no matter what you do. So as we kind of move that into the house, it's like, is it something we can directly control? Then we'll do something about that. If it's not, then we're like, we're just going to have to let that one go type deal.
And so, like, fighting well, too, like, one of the things I learned from one of my amazing doctors that I worked with was, and trained under, was to plan our fights.
Yes.
Because, so for example, I came in one day after the first day of school, and he was like, "How'd it go? First day of school, dropping off the kid off." And the doctor that I was training with, and I was like, "Oh, well, we fought." He's like, "Oh, well, did you?" I was like, "Yeah, we always fight on the first day of school. I don't know what's going on." He's like, "Well, the next time you just need to plan it." I was like, what? So next time you just need to know we're going to fight on the first day of school because we have two different expectations. I want to take it slow, take all the pictures, like kiss him goodbye. David just wants to walk with purpose,
Efficient bullet points
and get him there, right? Okay, so we have two different expectations going in. So it's probably going to be tense, uncomfortable. We're going to bicker a little bit, but like it is what it is. We always do that, right? Then it was noticing like we always fought on vacation.
Yeah.
So I don't know anyone who doesn't. I think only psychopaths don't fight on vacation.
Go to Disney World. And you'll
Right.
You're guaranteed.
That's not the happiest place on earth. I promise.
And it was very similar because like maybe I was going into the vacation thinking, oh, we're gonna like chill at the beach. It's gonna be relaxing. We're gonna have right. Maybe he's thinking we're only gonna do the beach for 2 hours and then we're gonna go inside. Whatever it was, we had all these expectations, and then we would just kind of take it out on each other and bicker.
Yeah.
So knowing what those expectations are beforehand and just voicing them. He can't read my mind. He doesn't know I just want to spend all day at the beach and do nothing. I have to tell him that, right?
So what do we do now? We get in the car immediately. Now it's a joke, and you'd be amazed at how we don't fight when you plan your fights. Because we'll get in the car and we'll make the joke. Someone will like, it might be tense. It's going to because that's what we do. It's the start of vacation. We're going to fight. So she'll automatically is like, okay, who's going to be mad first? Who wants to take their turn first? Because we can't be all mad at the same time. So who wants to go first? It's like, sometimes it's cold. Like, so it's like, and so like that little thing right there that she does, you're like, all right, fine. Let's just enjoy it. And I think, because you were talking about the first day of school. We have different priorities. Like, I want him to be on time. I want him to be respectful at school. It's like she wants him to have all the supplies. It's just different priorities. And when we don't talk about what our priority is for that subject,
You're going different directions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because we both have very strong personalities.
Oh,
and
yeah.
so, I mean, we will literally, there's a Sonic that's like a mile from our house. We both have two different ways we go. So, and we
And they're
both
both
think
the right way.
we both think the other person is like doesn't make any sense why you
Right.
would go that way. And so we just kind of don't start the small stuff. He goes a different way. It's not a big deal. One of the jokes, I don't know what with law enforcement, but with firefighters, marriages is they'll talk about coming in after shift. They're transitioning back into the house, right? One of the first things I look at is
The sink.
to see
Every
if
time.
there's dishes in the sink. And if there's dishes in the sink, it's on, right? It's trying to find all the things in the house that didn't get done while they were gone, all the things they would have done differently, right?
Yeah.
So
What causes that?
I think it goes back to like the station life where like everything's orderly, everything's kept, your equipment's kept clean, your gear's kept clean, the station is kept clean, the bathrooms are constantly clean, everything is nice and orderly and clean and in place. And I think we go back that just as it's a mechanism to what else is going on in our brain.
Sure.
If I can keep the station and all that stuff orderly, then the brain stuff can be all mixed up, So I think that's a coping mechanism. So when we come home and the home is in shambles, by my
Shambles?
perspective, I'm correcting myself. By my perspective, the home is in shambles, then it's now on me to fix it all or then nothing's going to go right that day because nothing's in order.
Yeah. Yeah. So did you hear that? Like expecting it's going to be a certain way when you come in. And something that really opened my eyes too is you said, Barbara, the thing is we can run 50 calls a day. We're still never going to leave dishes in the sink. So when we get home and we hear, well, I was really busy, they hear that as like, we just didn't care. And then the key that I heard you say too is then you feel immediately like, okay, well then I have to do it.
Right.
So when you walk in and the house is in shambles,
Right.
air quotes,
Yeah.
or it just has normal people living there.
Let's be fair. There is a shelf that's out of the wall right now.
That sounds like shambles.
Shambles.
Wow, look at that look she just gave me.
Don't side with him.
I should have wore my vest today. My bulletproof vest.
Is that when things are out of order,
Yeah.
you feel like, well, firefighter or whatever,
Yeah.
I have to take care of it. She left it here for me to take care of,
Yeah.
which is not really accurate, but that's the story you might be telling yourself in your head.
Right.
Yeah.
You're getting worked up.
Yes.
Yeah.
So now, like, we made a joke about it, but she called and told me about like the shelf breaking and stuff like that. And so now we're that and the sink. Like, one, I just don't look at the sink when I come home. I take a right and I don't even go in the kitchen. But those are the little things like that. Like, you know what? It's okay.
The bigger picture.
Right.
It's okay.
Like, are you okay? You fell off the ladder. You're okay. All right. We'll get the shelf fixed.
Right.
So but that was a process we had to go through of talking about those things to realize like I can't sweat those things like that. And to realize the big key was the transitions. Like, I'm at home. This is not the firehouse.
Yeah.
So things are a little bit differently.
Yeah. So basic communication. I mean, sometimes I'll even just text him and say, prepare your heart.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
prepare your heart, babe. Like, there's going to be dishes in the sink. Like, I've done my best or whatever, but it's there.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to non-first responder spouse to deal with their first responder spouse that they may not be aware of? A little kind of a checklist that indicators they can look for.
If they're doing okay, like, see if they're doing okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just better communication.
Well, we like to tell couples that you need to talk about two things. One is what the worst case scenario, which no one wants to think about, right? But like, what if he doesn't come home? Like, I hate to say it, but do we know where the passwords are? Do we know, like, if there's life insurance? Did you take your ex-wife off of the life insurance? That kind of things. It's uncomfortable, but you knock it out, 2 hours, done, right?
Yeah.
And now you just know, like, it's done, right? Okay. But then also, he's been on disability more than once, right?
Yeah.
And so for injuries, that's going to happen. You
Yeah,
guys get worn down. So have that conversation too. What do we need to know to manage that together? What kind of resources do we have? What does that look like? Another one is what do we do when you do break a shelf or there is a plumbing issue, right? So it stresses him out if I'm calling him when there's something that's going on at the house that is an emergency, but he can't do anything about it. So I need to be able to manage those. What's the plumber you want me to call? What's the electrician you trust? Who's the neighbor you trust to come over and unclog the sink or something like that, right? And then the third is know each couple's different, but know what your level is in terms of details, but like at least be able to know it was a bad call.
Yeah.
Every couple's different. Some are going to be sometimes people are nurses. They're totally fine with all the details, whatever. It doesn't affect them. But some are not ready to hear that, but they do need to know something happened and it was a bad call. So we tell them to have those conversations now rather than later. And then things to look out for are sleeping less, more irritated, less patience, isolating from family and friends where they used to be more comfortable. And everyone's going to go through seasons. I'm not talking about like, oh, he had like an off week. I'm talking about like, okay, I can look back and see like 6 months ago or a year ago, he or she was in a totally different place.
I go back, like when we did, the first time we ever did our presentation was at Dallas's Fires Association place. And it's this one I still regret this because I didn't have the answer that I have now. This wife, she came by herself without her husband. And at the end where he's like, what's the question? Like, anybody have any questions? She goes, how do I stop my husband from going to the gym all the time? And now, like, I had a generic answer. So, well, you just need to talk to him and communicate, like, hey, these are things we want to get done. And now, knowing what I know now and going back, I regret not saying, hey, look, you need to get to the heart of why he's doing it. Ask why. Have that hard conversation of, why are you going to the gym so much? Is it because you really enjoy it? Or is there something else going on that you're trying to work out or overcompensate for? Something like,
Okay,
you
but
got to dig
question.
deeper.
What if he or she is like, I'm fine, I just like the gym? Like, no. I mean, what if the spouse keeps running up against walls where the first responder's not letting them in?
I think that's where you come in. Well,
But they don't want to go get help. They
I
don't
know.
want to go
No,
get
no.
help. They don't want to talk.
I think that's a common scenario.
Right. Then, okay, so this just happened recently where that did happen. And that, because we've talked enough about this and we've created this network of spouses and families, a spouse called me to check on someone else and said, he's not talking to me. He is different. He's withdrawn. He's staring into the sky, things like that. And it's like, okay, I'll go talk to him. I think that's where that next level, that's where peer support comes into the whole family community that plays in, where the spouse is, and we've talked about that. Like, part of that preparation for family is like, she has a list of guys that she could call, because I don't want, maybe there's maybe the captain at my station. I don't want him knowing my business. So I don't want her calling my captain, but I've been up front. Like, if you do ever know something's up, these are the two people you can call to check on me. And that works out. But with that one, like with the spouse, is like the hard conversation and getting over the eggshells is, I think, the first part. And if they're not wanting to share, it's like, I just really like working out, then you've got to go that next level of, you can't start a fight over it then, because apparently that's something very important to me. Like, I enjoy working out. I love doing that. And now you're attacking something I really enjoy in some form of fashion. Why I'm doing it, maybe I don't want to share it, but that's where that conversation needs to start. And if I'm not wanting to share that, then that's where you go, well, I need to call so-and-so and figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
But
So you're saying pull other people in that are
Yes.
trusted,
yes,
right, and safe.
yes.
Yeah, to have a conversation. I think too, there's two things I think of. One is boundaries with grace and love. So I'll talk to spouses or partners or whatever about being, it's one thing to walk on eggshells or try to help them a little bit. It's in our nature to want to take care of them and protect them. I mean, even earlier when David was telling that story, I wanted to be like, stop, don't, I want to protect him.
Yeah.
So that's in our nature, and that's okay. That's good. That's loving. You love him. And over time, though, that's not good for that person or the family, right? So watching out that you're like not making too many concessions for them. So setting boundaries with grace and love. I love you, sweetie. And you did tell our son that you're going to take him fishing, and he's really looking forward to it. So,
Right.
so please, like, how can I help you help him go fulfill this commitment that you made, right? And then the other that was like right on the tip of my tongue was, this is a good one. You do your own work. I'll tell spouses, partners all the time, okay, they don't want to go, you go. You go, you do your work, you focus on yourself. And I don't mean like in a selfish way where you're like, oh, I'm moving out and I don't care about you anymore. I just mean like examine your own stuff, right? Dig deep into your own story, dig deep into your own wounds. And perhaps, in a year or so, because I do think it takes that long, when they see like you're growing, you're changing, and you're responding to them in different ways, they may think, hey, maybe I want to try something.
The one I like, the one she gives me is, I'll come home, or she'll call me the night before, which is nice. Is like, tomorrow at this time, I need A game. So that's what we call it. We got A game versus C game. There's no B game. It's either really good or really rough. It's like, I need A game at this time tomorrow. And so then it gives me the opportunity. It's like, okay, if you want A game here, this is what I need to get there. So it's the talking and the communication and expectations of like, well, this is what you said you would do, and this is how I need you to be. Versus like, we're going to your parents' house. Please don't go sit on the couch. Please talk. Yeah, and that's a legitimate conversation we've had. And maybe I still go sit on the couch, and maybe I don't, or I try a little bit more than I would if she hadn't have brought it up. So,
you guys are great together. You're a hell of a duo.
Thank you.
Of feeding off, and you can tell that you really have put the work in as a couple. And one being a first responder, it's quite impressive.
Thank you.
Is there anything else you would like to cover and let the listener know that would help them put them in a better state physically, mentally, spiritually?
Yeah. I think that part of the reason why we do gel together is one of the things we've spent a few years, maybe 4 or 5, building intentionally is community. So friendships outside of each other, obviously, and then couple friends, which is so hard to do.
and I've spent 18 years trying to make her laugh.
Oh, that's
That
true.
helps.
And you do make me laugh.
Yeah.
He does. I mean, we laugh a lot, y'all. Like, we really do not take ourselves very seriously, or each other. So with community, though, we started really building, like, being persistent and about, like, asking again and again. So it's really hard when you're like, hey guys, we're going to this concert, do you guys want to go with us? And you ask 30 people and you get 31 no's, right? It's like, okay, ouch.
I'm the one.
Yeah, I'm like, David,
You can't say no.
you can't say no. But and that happens again and again and again. But I would just say, keep asking, keep making plans. You may have to be the instigator. You may have to be the corraler. You may have to be the one that's like, hey, like I would text a bunch of wives. Like I'm pretty good about, knowing at the station who the other wives are, and saying, knowing they're on shift, and saying, hey, do you guys want to go down to the 4th of July parade together? And I might get a ton of no's, but I don't take it personally. Everyone's busy. But then eventually over time, we started to notice, okay, there are some of those people that are going to say yes. They're going to say yes pretty consistently, or they're going to say yes enough.
Yeah.
And then we get to know them. And then we kind of have a group. We have a pod, right?
Yeah.
And then we host a lot. And listen, we have, our house was built in 2004. We weren't in it when it was built.
No.
And it still has the carpet from 2004. Okay. It just is what it is. We invite people over. We don't worry about stains on the carpet or any of that craziness. And we just invite people in, and we invite, even if it's like, we don't know them that well, but they're on your crew, or hey, I saw her on Facebook. And we just try to host as much as we can so that people can get together. And I think if you're persistent, you get used to hearing the no's, and not take it personally.
Yeah.
And then reciprocity is really good. And it's actually one of the things that research-wise people are seeing is very different in relationships now as opposed to maybe 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. So remember when you used to be on the playground?
What does reciprocity mean?
I know.
I'm not saying that word.
Let's start with the definition.
Yeah.
I'm about to explain.
Okay, sorry.
So remember when you were on the playground, like, and you're like 7 years old, and you like saw this kid like playing in the sand, and you were like, hey, you want to be best friends? And he was like, yeah, let's be best friends. And then you guys ran around and you were best friends and you had fun. And so I'm not necessarily saying you like run up to someone at the station and say, hey, do you want to be best friends? But I don't know, maybe, right? But maybe you do kind of say like, hey, like I think we try to be really intentional about telling our friends, hey, you're a good friend. You guys are our good friends. What can we do for you? Like telling them how we feel about them, telling them that they mean something to us, telling them that they are special to us. And I think that starts to build that bond. So being persistent, getting used to no's, reciprocity.
We use the love word a lot.
We do. We use the love word with our friends. And don't be worried about like, oh, we don't have the perfect house or the perfect backyard or the perfect car or any of that kind of stuff.
Or you yourself don't have to be perfect.
And you
we don't worry about
don't have to be
that's the
perfect.
big one we don't worry about.
Right. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So then that way you're inviting people into the mess, but like everyone's just happy to be there anyway. So
I've shown up in parties in pajamas.
you have showed up in parties in pajamas.
Just
Nothing
because
wrong with
that
that.
community's
You gotta be
there.
comfortable.
Yeah,
That's right.
exactly.
You want to be comfortable. Right.
But it's just like you said, the marriage, we put in the work in the marriage. Like the community takes just as much work, feeding that community and then being fed by them at the same time is what makes it work. And it is hard sometimes. Like, there are a lot of no's, or there's sometimes you don't, but like the payoff, like when there's been some bad times and that community's been there, like that's when, like, okay, that's how we got through it. You know,
You're involved in your church.
Yeah.
And that people that are spiritual or religious, you know, how does mental health and resiliency, how do they go hand in hand?
You know, sometimes I think it helps, and sometimes I think it doesn't, and I'll explain why. You know, I'm a Christian. I believe in God. I've accepted Christ, and yet having to experience or know or hear some of the stories that we hear can feel like, what the heck? Where is he? I don't get this. This is messed up, right? So sometimes it almost feels like they can be at odds with each other. Over time, where I've gotten with it is to believe that first responders are God's first line to helping to serve other people on earth, right? So whether you're a believer or not, we're meeting people, and you guys are meeting people in suffering. You're meeting people at their worst moments, and you're hopefully showing them some grace, compassion, and some help at the same time. So that's how I kind of mesh those two or reconcile them. It's not all going to make sense to me on this side, but it helps me to find meaning in some of the work when it's really hard.
That's an incredible answer.
That is
Thank
a
you.
great
Thank
answer.
you for that.
Yeah, there was a pastor, Matt Chandler. He said something very similar. Like, the world is chaotic, and he's put certain people in this world to kind of help show how God can be a presence in someone's life. And sometimes those are first responders when they come in with just a nice word on a very bad day. That's grace. That's God's grace. For me, faith is like, I grew up in it. Missionary, grandson of missionaries, and then my dad being a pastor is like, that's kind of been the foundation of, like, especially mental health. It helps me to know that there's something bigger than me. There's a plan or a purpose that's bigger than me. Like, those days, it's not always on my shoulders. And like, God is looking out for me. I know that God's looking out for everybody. That's my belief. And that helps my mental, like, it's not all on me, and something bigger is going on, even if I don't understand it.
Yeah, and the Meyer Clinic is a faith-based clinic, but it's everybody comes in. It certainly does not have to be. You don't have to be Christian to be there. You're not going to get necessarily beaten down with. Are you a believer? And you better be a believer. It's not even like that. I mean, I do encourage all first responders, and really maybe any of my clients, to explore their own beliefs about, okay, how do you make sense of this? Like, how can you? Because if you don't, that stuff is going to just continue to turmoil inside of you if you don't have a way to start sort of trying to make sense of it. So
I love that. That's great. So I have a final question for each of you. Mm-hmm. You've had a lot of life experiences, a lot of tragedy, and a lot of mending, and you also mend others and you save others, right? David, what would you say your why is? And I want Barbara to answer as well.
My why for doing those things.
And what is your mission in life? What is your why?
My why is probably how I got into even the association to begin with, was the guys. Like, I'm a deep believer in the brotherhood, and I'm a deep believer in personal relationships. And so that's why, that's why I got in the association, and that's why I helped with grievances and appeals, is just to be there for the brotherhood and show that everybody's not alone. Like, everybody needs somebody at some point. And I can do that. I'm not the best at words. I'm not the best at advice, but I can show up. So my why is the brotherhood. My family, that's my why.
that's really good. That's part of exactly what I was going to say.
Oh, okay, good.
You showed your answer.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
Your faith answer was way better than mine, so that's good. I got to go first.
Oh, she
Yeah.
one-upped you there.
Yeah. Welcome
We
to
all know
marriage.
those
That's like the
one-uppers.
best one I've ever heard.
Well, I think that, gosh, what was I about to say? So, I'll joke around, like, there's people that are smarter than me, more well-trained than me, have better experience than me, but I'm the one that's showing up. So I'm kind of what you get, and I'm going to be as present as possible, because for me, why is, I've been in and out of counseling since I was like 18, 16. I could maybe tell you 5 things that I learned in counseling, but the most important thing, especially when I was a wild child teenager, was that someone was just present with me and that I could just be safe with them. And for me, that's holy. That's the sacred work of when someone says to me, I've never shared this before, or thank you for letting me share this with you, or unpacking something that's incredibly difficult and they cannot feel judged or hurt or anything like that, then I'm like, oh, this is the Lord's work. I mean, this is where it's happening right here. For me, that's just for me. So why do I do it selfishly? Because I love that space.
Thank you.
That is fantastic. We've been going back and forth through text and emails, and it's really nice to finally meet you in person. And I look forward to continuing friendship and bouncing some ideas off of you in the future, and maybe I'll come back as a guest co-host. All right, it'd be fun.
Now you're working in. She loves podcasts.
I like
that's a dream, like to co-host like one time.
Wow,
You're like,
I like that she's the Yard Ticket fans too. So,
oh yeah,
good.
Right? Yeah.
Thank y'all so much for doing this for us.
Oh my God!
we're
thank
happy to.
You guys really and not just because you had us on, but because of what you're doing to kind of bring awareness and to let people come tell their stories, and this is huge. I mean, I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
McKinney Fire in the house.
Yep, first one.
Yeah.
Thank y'all so much.
Thank you.
Hey brother, hey sister, I'll never give up on you. Hey Mrs., hey mister, I'll see this all the way through. No matter how far the sun and the moon, I'll never give up on you. Down when you're lonely, I'll pull you up. Life leaves you heavy when the going gets tough. I'll be your shoulder, together we'll run up from the bottom, yeah, we'll rise above. Hey brother, hey sister, I'll never give up on you. Hey Mrs., hey mister, I'll see this all the way through. No matter how far the sun and the moon, I'll never give up on you. Sister, I'll never give up on you. Hey Mrs., hey mister, I'll see this all the way through. No matter how far, for the gold and the blue, I'll never give up on you.